This happened to me a few years ago on one Halloween night I'll never forget. I was trick-or-treating with my friends Ben and Mia. We were just 3 kids, hyped up on sugar and excitement, making our way through the neighborhood, filling our bags with candy, and laughing as we went from house to house. We had hit most of the houses by then, and were about to head home. But that's when I saw the last house at the end of the road, just past the others. It was set a bit farther back from the street, looking like it had been there forever, old and creaky, and there were no decorations anywhere. Something about it felt wrong, but it was Halloween, and we were in that spooky, thrill-seeking mood. I convinced Ben and Mia to come with me for one last try. After all, we'd been to almost every single house in the neighborhood, and we figured maybe, just maybe, there'd be some extra candy for us too. When we got to the front door, the lights were on inside, even though everything around it was dark. We knocked on the front door, then rang the bell, but nothing happened. It was dead quiet. But the lights were definitely on, so we rang again, still standing there with our bags open, expecting someone to answer. After a while, we heard footsteps inside, and finally, the door opened. A tall man stood there, and he looked a bit weird. He seemed annoyed at first, like we were interrupting him or something. But then, as if something changed his mind, he just gave us a smile and invited us in, saying he had some candy inside. I felt a weird twist in my stomach, like I shouldn't go in. But when you're a kid, the promise of candy can overpower any sense of fear or doubt. So, we stepped inside. He closed the door behind us, and the house felt strange. It was really cold inside. Even though all the lights were on, it was really strange. Everything inside the house seemed to creak around us. The man told us that the candy was upstairs. I hesitated, looking at Ben and Mia, but Ben really didn't care and told us that he'd go check it out. Mia and I waited downstairs, while Ben followed the man up the staircase. I was already regretting this, standing there in this dim-lit room, looking around at the old wallpaper peeling from the walls and the dusty furniture that just surrounded us. Then, suddenly, I heard Ben scream. It was loud and desperate, and cut right through the silence. My stomach dropped. I looked up, and even before I had time to think, I saw Ben bolting down the stairs. His face was so pale, I could instantly see that he was scared. Right behind him was the man, and he wasn't just following Ben. He was holding a knife, and I couldn't believe it. But there it was. The man's face was twisted into a horrible expression that was nothing like the smile that he'd showed us before. Without thinking, I grabbed Mia's arm, and we ran out of the house. We burst through the front door, stumbling into the cold night air. I heard the man's footsteps behind us, and I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. As we ran across his yard, we didn't stop. We dashed through the bushes by the edge of the yard, crouching low and trying to stay as still as possible. We could hear his footsteps coming closer, crunching through the dead leaves. He was talking to himself, like an angry, crazy person. I just held my breath, praying that he wouldn't find us. The man walked right past us, looking for us in the opposite direction. We stayed hidden, barely holding our breath, watching him search for us. And then, finally, he went back inside his house. As soon as we saw him go inside, we took off running as fast as we could. We didn't stop until we were back in our neighborhood, back where there were lights and people, where we finally felt safe again. We ran straight to our parents, breathless and shaking, telling them what had happened, though I don't think they believed us at first. But then, seeing how terrified we were, they took us seriously and called the police. The police went to the man's house later that night, but when they got there, he was already gone. They didn't find a trace of him, like he disappeared into thin air. But they did find something else. When they searched upstairs, they discovered old, dusty bedrooms, and in those rooms, they found something that still makes my skin crawl. There were bodies of kids, just like us, tucked away, hidden from the world, like they've been kept in there for years. We never saw that man again, and the police never found him. Now, every Halloween, I think back to that house, to that night, and I still get a chill down my spine. If there's one thing I learned from this situation, it's that sometimes the scariest things on Halloween aren't the costumes or the haunted houses. Sometimes the real monsters are the ones waiting just past the last house at the end of the road. This happened to me when I was 17 years old. It was Halloween night, and my best friend Lily and I thought it would be a fun way to try and Ouija board. We'd both seen the creepy videos online, read stories, and thought we'd handle it much better than all those people who freaked out and ran away. We'd done ghost hunts before, usually just late nights with flashlights in old buildings or scaring each other in graveyards. But this Halloween, we wanted something bigger, something real. We bought an Ouija board to the old cemetery just outside our town. It was dark, cold, and dead quiet. No trick-or-treaters anywhere. Only the sound of leaves crunching under our feet and the occasional gust of wind throughout the trees. We settled down under a massive oak tree in the middle of the graveyard, surrounded by headstones that were so worn down you couldn't even read most of the names anymore. We lit a couple of candles and placed the board right in front of us. Lily and I locked eyes, a mixture of nervous laughter and excitement, and placed our fingers on the planchette. It felt ridiculous at first, and nothing happened. We kept joking around, trying to keep our voices low, just in case we did disturb something. We started asking questions like, "Is there anyone here? Can you give us a sign?" The usual stuff. But nothing happened. This went on for about 20 minutes, and then, out of nowhere, the planchette moved. Neither of us said anything, but I could feel Lily's hands tightening slightly. I asked, "Is there someone with us right now?" And it slipped to yes. We were both quiet. All the giggles had gone. I asked the spirits its name, and the planchette spelled out, "Abaddon." I had no idea what it meant, but Lily looked up at me, her face pale. She whispered, "Abaddon, it's a demon's name." I wanted to stop right there, but curiosity got the better of us. I asked, "Why are you here?" And the planchette spelled, "Death." My heart felt like it stopped, but I couldn't pull my hands away. Lily and I were frozen, unable to look away from each other, the board, or the shadows starting to close in around us. The candle's flame flickered hard, almost going out, and then we both heard something, this low, guttural growling. It didn't sound human at all. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere, surrounding us. I looked around and saw nothing, but just barely beyond the reach of the candlelight. Something tall, dark, and twisted, lurking among the graves. It felt like the air was vibrating, like there was this deep, pulsing pressure down on us. I asked again, my voice barely with a whisper, "Do you want us to leave?" The planchette moved to no, so fast it almost slid out of our hands. We took our hands off the board, but the growling got louder, and the air felt so thick it was hard to breathe. We scrambled to our feet, but as we turned to leave, the shadows seemed to shift, like they were moving and circling around us. I looked back to the board, and I swear the planchette was moving all on its own, spelling out something we couldn't see. Lily grabbed my arm, and we ran, our footsteps echoing through the empty graveyard. It felt like we were being chased, like there was something dark and malicious just inches behind us. I didn't dare look back, but I felt a heavy presence, cold and angry, trailing right on our heels. We stumbled, barely keeping our balance, as we tore through the rows of headstones, slipping on the muddy ground. We made it back to my car, slammed the doors, and locked them. We didn't say anything. We just sat there, breathing heavily, staring back at the graveyard. Lily and I didn't want to take any chances, drove out to an open field, and set it on fire. Watching those flames flick up around the board, turning it in black and brittle, made me feel a little better, like we were closing whatever door we had opened. It's been 5 years since that incident now, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that same growling noise in my dreams, or feel that pressing darkness around me. I don't know if he fully got rid of it, so if you ever get the idea to use an Ouija board on Halloween night, just don't. You'd never know what might follow you home. A few years ago, while working as a night security guard at a mall, I experienced something that still haunts me. Most nights, I'd sit in the CCTV room, watching the monitors, mostly just seeing empty hallways and occasional late-night shoppers. One night, I noticed 2 women enter an elevator on one of the screens. They were talking, laughing, nothing out of the ordinary. When they exited, the door stayed open a few seconds longer, and that's when I saw it. A figure appeared, small, like a young boy, standing still at the back of the elevator. He hadn't entered with the women. He just kind of appeared. He looked blurry, not quite solid, staring straight ahead. I rewound the footage multiple times, but every time it was the exact same thing. The woman entered alone and left alone, but after they were gone, the boy would appear, looking almost ghostly. I showed the video to my supervisor, hoping that he'd have an explanation, but he was just as shocked as I was. To this day, I'm not sure who or what I saw, but since then, every time I watch an empty elevator, I feel a shiver, wondering if I might see that boy again. One night, I was getting ready for my night shift at the hospital. I had to drive for about 20 minutes to reach my workplace, and I'd been having issues with my car starting up lately. It would make the strange clicking sound whenever I tried to turn it on. So, that night, I decided to record it with my phone to show the mechanic later. I stepped out into the driveway, phone in hand, already recording, as I approached the car. I opened the door, got in, and prepared the phone up against the dash to get the full startup sequence on video. I shut the door, took a breath, and turned the key. The car shook a bit. Then it finally started. As the headlights came on, I could see the front yard lit up through the windshield. And that's when I froze. In the yard, for just a second, the headlights captured something I hadn't expected at all. A figure standing still in the garden. It was a woman, faint and almost translucent, standing next to the bushes. She had long, disheveled hair, and her face looked shadowed with a hollow expression. Her clothes looked like they were from another era, almost like an old, torn gown. I barely registered it at first. She disappeared in an instant, but I was left sitting there, feeling this icy chill in my bones. My heart was pounding, and I felt frozen, staring out at the empty garden. In shock and disbelief, I grabbed my phone and replayed the video, and there she was, clear as day, just standing there, staring straight at the car before vanishing again. I checked outside, but the garden was empty, silent. I couldn't bring myself to stay alone in the driveway any longer, so I backed out and left, feeling her eyes on me the entire way down the street. I kept that video, but I can't bring myself to watch it again. Every time I start my car in the dark now, I hold my breath, waiting, wondering if she's gonna be there again, watching me from my garden. I was working the night shift as a ticket collector at the public parking lot. It was past midnight, and I was half asleep at the toll booth, with barely any cars coming through. I was mostly zoning out, staring at the empty road, when I noticed headlights approaching. Out of habit, I opened the window of the booth and held out my hand, ready to collect the ticket. But a few seconds went by, and I didn't feel anyone place a ticket in my hand. Confused, I looked over, only to realize there was no one in the driver's seat. I leaned out of the boot for a better look, thinking that maybe the driver had gotten out or leaned over or something. But the car was empty, doors closed, headlights on, and no one on the wheel. My mind was confused, trying to make sense of it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement inside the car. A dark shape began to shift from the back seat, slowly crawling up towards the front. It was an eerie, shadowy figure, like a silhouette with no features, twisting and dragging itself onto the car roof. It crouched there, hunched, and it was watching me. I stumbled back in shock, adrenaline kicking in, as I sprinted away from the toll booth without looking back. The next day, I learned the entire incident was captured on the security camera. It's blurry, but you can clearly see the empty car, the shadow moving inside it, and me running off into the night. I quit that job soon after and haven't set foot near that parking lot ever again. To this day, I still don't know what that figure was or why it had been waiting in the car. A few years ago, I was working late at the office, wrapping up some projects that were due the next morning. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight, and everyone else had left hours ago. I was the last one there, so I shut down my computer, double-checked that everything was locked, and finally left the office. As I walked out of the building and into the empty parking lot, I turned to look back at the office windows out of habit, just to make sure everything looked in order. But as my eyes scanned the windows, I just stopped. Behind one of the curtains in the office window, I saw a shadowy figure standing completely still. It was shaped exactly like a person, and it was facing the glass. But there was something deeply wrong about it. The shadow didn't move at all. It didn't shift. Just stood there, motionless, like it was watching me. I blinked, thinking it had to be a trick of the light or something, or maybe just a reflection of something outside. But it didn't disappear. The figure remained eerily outlined against the curtain. I couldn't see any features, just a dark, unmoving silhouette. My mind panicked, trying to rationalize it. I knew I was the last one in the building. I just locked the doors myself, and I was positive no one had been there when I left. The shadow, though, seemed to say otherwise. I wanted to go back inside, but something held me back. A cold dread in the pit of my stomach. I quickly took out my phone and recorded it, thinking that it was just my imagination. But the shadow figure was just still there, standing and watching. The next day, I told a few of my colleagues about it and even showed them the video, hoping that someone might have an explanation. But everyone swore they hadn't been in the office building that late, and no one could explain what I'd seen. I never stayed late in the office again. And every time I pass that window, I feel like something or someone is still standing there, just out of sight, watching me. A few months ago, I was driving through a rural area late at night, with only the light from my car and the dash cam recording the empty road. It was just me, the road, and the miles of trees stretching out on both sides. Suddenly, my headlights caught something strange up ahead. A weird, cloaked figure, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. I slowed down, unsure of what to make of it. I sounded the horn, expecting whoever it was to just move, Maybe it was just a prank by some local kids. But the figure didn't budge. It just stood there, shrouded in the dark cloak, completely motionless. Frustrated, I decided to step out of the car to get a closer look, convinced that I'd find some kid hiding under the cloak, trying to scare passing drivers. I approached it and grabbed the cloak and yanked it off in one swift motion. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Just an empty, hollow cloak lying crumpled on the road. I was shocked and terrified. I ran back to my car, jumped back into it, and floored it, not daring to look back. The dashcam caught it all, but I haven't dared to watch it again. That stretch of road has a darkness about it, and every time I think about it, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was standing there wasn't entirely human. My name is Daniel, and I was 13 when this happened. My parents and I had gone to visit my uncle's house in the countryside. He lived in this quaint old house surrounded by acres of farmland, the kind of place where you would hear crickets chirping all night and see stars so bright it felt like they were just above your head. I had no idea that everything was about to change. It was the second night of our visit. After dinner, my two cousins and I decided to play hide and seek. My uncle's farm was massive, with open fields, a barn, and a dirt road leading to a patch of trees that marked the start of a forest. When it was my turn to seek, I covered my eyes and counted to 20, trying not to peek at both of my cousins. Once I finished counted, I shouted,
"Ready or not, here I come."
And I started to search for them. I looked behind the barn, inside a haystack, and even around the tractor, but I couldn't find them. Their hiding spots were too good. After a while, I started walking down towards the dirt road that led to the forest. It was darker there, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. I figured they might have thought it might be clever to hide close to the edge of the woods. I started walking towards the trees, and that's when I heard something. A rustling sound came from one of the bushes by the tree line. It wasn't the sound of wind or small animals. It was heavier. Thinking it might be one of my cousins trying to scare me, I just called out,
"I found you. I know you're in there."
But no one answered. The rustling stopped, but something about the air felt wrong. I can't explain it, but I felt a chill in the back of my neck. Still, I told myself not to be a chicken, and I stepped closer. As I pushed aside the bushes to peek, I froze. Just a few feet away, sitting in the dirt, was an old woman. At least I think it was a woman. She had stringy white hair that clung to her pale, wrinkled face. Her eyes were sunken, staring at me without even blinking. She was wearing a torn, dirty dress. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The worst part was that she had no legs. Her entire body ended abruptly at the waist. Yet she sat comfortably, perfectly balanced, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Her arms were long and bony, the fingers were unnaturally thin, and her nails looked sharp. But what terrified me most was the fact that her mouth was wide open. It stretched unnaturally wide into a grin, showing dirty yellow jagged teeth. She didn't say anything at all. She didn't move. She just sat there staring at me with that horrifying smile. I don't know how long I stood there paralyzed with fear, but when she twitched, just slightly, I snapped out of it. I turned back and bolted toward the house, my legs moving faster than they ever had. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door behind me. My parents and my uncle were in the living room chatting. They looked at me with a confused expression, and my mom even asked what had happened. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head and muttered something about being tired before running up to my room. That night, as I laid in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Out of curiosity, I got up and peeked out of my bedroom window, which had a clear view of the forest. Everything looked normal, no sign of her. But just as I was about to turn away, I saw something, or someone, standing right at the edge of the trees. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it looked like a figure. tall, almost blending into the shadows. I blinked and it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night, and the next morning, I told my cousins about it. They laughed at first, thinking that I was just trying to scare them. But when they saw how serious I was, their laughter faded. My uncle heard us and warned us never to go near that forest. He said that the locals believed that it was cursed, but he didn't exactly explain why. I never went near those trees again. Even now, years later, I can't forget her face, or even that grin. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I didn't run away. But honestly, I'm just glad that I didn't stick around to find out. Number 10. Ghost Jail. My name is Kevin, and this happened to me a few years ago. I was just messing around with my friends, and we had this idea to make a video as ghost hunters. There's this old county jail near where we live, so we just thought, why not use that for the location? I was the one holding the camera, playing the part of the investigator, walking around and narrating like a pro. I remember passing this dusty old jail cell in the window, glancing at it for a second before moving on. Honestly, I didn't think anything of it at the time. We were too busy laughing and trying to make our skit look as ridiculous as possible. But later, when I was reviewing the footage at home, something strange caught my eye. Right there in the window, clear as day, was a pale, colorless face staring right back at me. The details were so vivid. The brow, the nose, those empty haunting eyes. The head was tilted, like the ghost was studying me. I still get chills thinking about it. What freaked me out the most was the timing. In the video, right as I say something about finding real ghost evidence, this face suddenly appeared. It was like the ghost wanted to see me, like it was trying to reach out. I've thought about going back to that jail to see if I can find any more ghosts, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back. Number 9. Creepy Restaurant. My name's Ray, and this happened to me when I was working at a local restaurant. It was just a normal day. People coming in, grabbing food and drinks, nothing unusual. I was near the counter when I saw something that I'll never forget. At first, I thought it was just a shadow in the corner of my eye. But when I looked closer, it was shaped like a person. It was dark, like a shadow, but it had depth. It almost looked like it was getting a table. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It sat down for a moment, then shifted into this floating black orb. That's when I froze. It moved slowly towards the window, like it was just gazing outside. Then it started to rise, higher and higher, until it disappeared completely. What really got me was when one of the customers turned and saw it too. They stood there, stunned, before backing away, like they just couldn't believe their own eyes. I don't know what it was or where it went, but I haven't felt the same about the place ever since. Number 8. The Ghost in the Stadium. This happened during a Brazilian soccer match. I've been a soccer fan for my whole life, and I even got a job as a cameraman during the live events. The game was intense and the crowd was electric. Everyone was so focused on the players and having a great time. That's when I noticed something strange in the camera. A shadow figure was seen sprinting through the stands. It wasn't a person, though it moved too fast, and the way it flowed didn't seem natural. What really struck me was how nobody reacted at all. This figure was running full speed through the crowd, but no one even flinched. Nobody looked up. It was like I was the only one who could see it. I kept watching as it made its way through the stadium, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I tried to tell my friends about it later, but they just laughed it off. Even now, I wonder if what I saw was real or something only meant for me. But when I checked the footage of the camera again, I could clearly see that I wasn't hallucinating, and the experience of seeing the ghost running through the stadium was absolutely real. Number 7. The TV and the Fridge Ghost. This story is about when I lived in a house I'm sure was haunted. One night, I heard banging in the kitchen. When I checked my cameras later, there was a video on it. It showed the fridge door slamming open and shut all by itself. Even stranger, in the reflection of the oven, you could only see the camera floating in midair, but no one was holding it. Another time, my TV started rocking violently. It moved so much that I thought it was going to break. I filmed everything, even showing behind the TV to prove there were no wires. The worst moment was when the fridge door started slamming again, and this time it stayed open, as if it was daring me to come closer. I eventually moved out of the house, but I'll never forget how real the fear was. Number 6. Spying Ghost. My name's Jamie, and this happened when I was hanging out with some of my friends in a courtyard. We were playing catch when one of my friends suddenly just stopped and pointed up at a window. At first, I couldn't see anything, but then I saw it. A pale face watching us from high above. It was ghostly, and the way it just stared at us gave me chills. Then, it just slowly slipped out of view. We told our property manager, but she just said that the room was locked for many years and it was impossible for somebody to be living up there. She even took us up there to check. The room was completely empty, but we know what we saw, and it felt like it was watching us for a reason. Number 5. Old Pete's Ghost. My name's Sarah, and I used to work at the Carlisle Castle Hotel in Sydney. It's a great place, but it's haunted by Old Pete, a former employee who hasn't exactly moved on. One time, I saw 2 bottles of red wine fly up the shelf. It wasn't random, they were this thrown. Another time, a glass shattered under the server as if someone had deliberately smashed it. The craziest part? There's footage of him on the security camera. You can see his head, clear as day, waving. What's strange is that Pete only messes with red wine, his favorite drink when he was alive. It's almost like he's still working on the bar, in his own ghostly way. Number 4. The Strange Church. This happened when my friend Jake and I decided to explore an old chapel. It was rumored to be haunted. As soon as we got there, we felt uneasy. The walls were covered in prayers and warnings. Inside, it got worse. The place was dark and silent, but then we heard it, a piano playing. We turned off our flashlights and hid in a closet, too scared to move. When we peeked out, we saw it. A black figure hunched over the piano. It turned towards us and we bolted. The music stopped as we ran, and I swear, I felt as if that figure was chasing us. I've never been so scared in my life. Number 3. The Teleporter. My name's Emily, and this happened when I was at home with my sister. We were in the living room, and when I saw a strange-looking figure, a girl dressed in old-fashioned clothes, floating in the doorway. I screamed and she just disappeared, but then she reappeared at the top of the stairs. We ran outside, but when we looked back, she was in the window, just staring at us. She moved so fast, it was like she could be in 2 places at once. I still wonder what exactly was it that she wanted, but I'm glad we didn't just stick around to find out. Number 2. Stay away from the attic. This happened back in 2008. My dogs started acting really strange. They wouldn't leave the bedroom and were terrified of something in the house. One day, I heard banging in the attic. When I went up to check, everything was trashed. Later, objects just started moving on their own, and my radio turned to static. The door to the attic even opened and shut by itself. Whatever was in that house wasn't just trying to scare me. It felt angry. I ended up moving out, but I still wonder what exactly was inside that attic and what did it want from me, and what would happen if I would end up going inside the attic late at night. Before we go to number 1, I really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, give a like to this video, and share this video as much as you can so it can support the growth of the channel and so it can help me to create more amazing videos for everyone. Number 1. Abandoned school. A group of teenagers decided to check out an old abandoned school. They were just curious, even though the place gave them the creeps. As they climbed a creaky set of stairs, they froze. Somewhere behind a nearby door, they heard something that sounded like a dog whining. They freaked out, so they quickly ran down the stairs, sticking close together at the bottom. But after a few nervous jokes and laughing, they hyped themselves up. They decided to skip the upstairs and stick to the lower floors instead. With everyone together, they felt a little brave. Jokes started flying around, and as soon as they were laughing, they just kept walking down the dim, creaky hallways. Their flashlights flickered across some graffiti on the walls, and for a moment, it was like a small comfort. It reassured them, thinking that other people had been there before. Maybe it wasn't that scary after all. But as they kept exploring, things started to feel different. The jokes faded, and they just became completely silent. They couldn't even put a finger on it, but something just felt wrong. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and they couldn't even shake this weird feeling crawling up their spines. One of them even mentioned their phone dying for no reason. It had been fully charged just a second ago. One of the teens kept recording everything, which they probably regretted later. When they stepped into one of the classrooms, something strange happened. A figure appeared. It was a man, but it didn't have a head. No blood, no gore, just standing there, clear as day. The teens froze, too scared to even scream. At the same moment, they heard loud chanting echoing throughout the entire building. It was probably prayers from a nearby mosque, but it made the whole thing even creepier. Strangely, none of them seemed to notice the headless man right there in front of them. They just kept exploring like nothing ever happened. Later, when they watched the video, they saw it. The headless figure walking straight toward them in that classroom. It wasn't just some weird shadow or trick of the light. It was real. That footage, it stayed with them forever, haunting their dreams, a reminder of the thing that had been right there with them, silently watching them.